And good morning. It is time for the Mike Hewitt Show. Brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com. And your host, Mike Hewitt. Good morning, Mike.
Hey, good morning. Listen, we've got a pretty packed show today, which I'm excited about. We'll have two guests. The first is Daniel Horowitz. Daniel, are you with me?
Dan is not with you. Good morning, Dan.
Hey, good morning.
Daniel Horowitz, listen, welcome to the Mike Hewitt Show.
So glad to be on with you.
And I appreciate you. Listen, folks, Daniel Horowitz is senior editor of Conservative Review. And as I understand it, you've been with the Madison Project and Red State and Breitbart, and I think you've given more interviews than I have. You're all over the media, and I appreciate you doing that.
No, absolutely. I must say it has been a pretty taxing week and month, but, you know, defending Western civilization is no small task to shirk from, and hopefully my wife won't be too mad at me for taking away too much family time.
I love that term, defending Western civilization.
It is
it's
defending.
About time someone stood tall. Thank you.
That's what it is. That's what it boils down to.
It really is. And that's. I don't know that folks realize that it's really that. That's really the bottom line. That's where we're at right now. One of the topics I wanted to discuss with you, and also maybe pick your brain a little bit for what you're seeing from your vantage. But the topic for us today is kind of a, for lack of better words, multiculturalism versus assimilation. And the reason I'm picking that topic, Daniel, and you're way more versed in this than we are, but I wanted to get your feel for it. To me, that's one of the root problems, is that there's a certain percentage of our leadership and maybe of grassroots in America that really are advancing multiculturalism. And I got to tell you, I think that's what's hurting us versus assimilation. In other words, when I was a young person and we had immigrants coming to the United States, including my family 2 generations ago, the goal was to come to America to be Americans. And now it feels like a lot of our leadership and maybe a third or half of our grassroots are telling folks to stay in their little voter blocks, for lack of better words. Am I off base with that kind of thinking?
Wow, Mike. I mean, you know, this is going to be a challenge to get this all in this hour. It's going to be a big part of my upcoming book on disenfranchised, how we have societal transformation without representation, without the input of the people. But you literally touched on what is probably the most foundational problem, most foundational public policy problem we're up against. I mean, wow, where to begin? So, you know, first off, let's just start from today. I think it's very appropriate based on the news that just came out this past hour. Time magazine announced their person of the year, and their person was Angela Merkel, the premier of Germany, the chancellor of Germany.
Sure.
Now, why was she chosen? I think we all know, because she is the, you know, grand deacon. She is, let's say, she is the pope of multiculturalism. You know, by their selection of Merkel, it tells you everything you need to know about the government media in Western countries. I say it all the time. People think that the West is very secular. But the truth is, everyone needs to believe in something, you know, intangible, something greater, something at least pseudo-spiritual. And I always like to express it like this: whereas the Muslims believe in Sharia, and, you know, many people in the West are just astounding. Wow, they're willing to die for a cause. They're willing to die for something. Well, let me tell you something. Western secular pagans are willing to die for their religion too. Their religion is multiculturalism. Their religion is political correctness. And they would rather see Western civilization decline before their eyes. They would rather die. They would rather put themselves in a ubiquitous, you know, indefensible situation with immigration, with Islamic terror. You certainly see it in Europe. We're about a half a step behind in America. They would rather that than violate the tenets of political correctness. You see it in the religion, the fact that they made Angela Merkel the person of the year for Time magazine. You see it in the reaction to Donald Trump. You know, look, someone could disagree with Donald Trump. They could think it's even repugnant. They could think it goes too far. But by golly, Donald Trump is not the problem. You might not agree with the solution, but isn't the problem the threat to Western civilization, the ubiquitous cyber jihad that is just radicalizing so many people, even ones that have been here for a long time? Isn't that the concern? But no, they would rather die. They would rather see their country destroyed and their children have no future within Western civilization than be accused of being a racist.
Well,
that is how
let me
just
let me just jump in on being accused of a racist, because I think, and this is Jim Riley, I'm Mike's sidekick for the day, but one of the reasons that we have not been able to address these issues is that if you bring up anything that has even remotely been deemed racist or racially related, you are in fact a racist just by bringing it up. And that's where Donald Trump's popularity comes from. He's one of the first politicians to speak in what we would call plain talk in perhaps generations.
Well, it's funny. I have never witnessed a greater dichotomy between the political class, and that includes the pseudo-conservatives, Conservative Inc. and all the conservative, writers, versus the grassroots. You saw the AP poll just came out. 76% want a cool down from immigration in the Middle East, and I would imagine the remaining 20% or so, it's not like they're beating down the doors. Oh my gosh, you better bring in more. But these people on the web, I had a reporter from National Journal tell me, wow, Daniel, I haven't seen what you're saying elsewhere. This is not what I see in my Twitter timeline. And I said, well, I got news for you. When it comes to many issues, but immigration in particular, your Twitter timeline ain't America. It doesn't reflect the values of where most people are. And I think most people still uphold those values of our immigration of the past, where you championed Americanization. Not that you have to be any particular, type or come from a particular place, but you would all come and assimilate particularly into our political values. That's what our founders, whenever they spoke about immigration, they were most concerned about the political values more so than the food you eat or, some of the more trivial aspects of assimilation. They badly wanted people to become what they refer to, we have all the hyphenated Americanism nowadays. They had one hyphenated term that they used. Jefferson used it a lot, Republican Americanism. And I don't mean republicanism as in the Republican Party, but republicanism.
Daniel, I often talk about republicanism, small r, a republican form of government in the sense of a republic, and with elected leadership and limited and constitutional and, frankly, a capitalist-driven economic engine. The problem with a lot of folks when they're looking to things like multiculturalism is, frankly, these are not the staples that they want. They want an overbridging government that is, they see it as what America is rather than America itself. And when you look at multiculturalism, and I try to get my head around what's the purpose? Why would somebody want multiculturalism? It sounds warm and fuzzy just to say the word until you look at what it means, and it's really segregation.
Well, what does it mean? Because I think that's a good point here. What does multiculturalism mean? What is it about it that you don't like?
Listen, it is by definition segregation. Okay. So if you come from the Polish area, you're going to have a Polish neighborhood, and if you come from the Middle East, we're going to have you in the Middle East area. So Dearborn. So
that's
so
location. But can they have to speak English?
No, they want separate identities.
Oh, there's more than just a neighborhood.
So Abe Lincoln would have said a house divided. We've got a house divided by so many we can't count how many divisions there are, rather than everyone saying, let's be American, the reason we came here. Imagine going to somewhere like China and saying, we left America because we don't like it, so we're going to make China just like America.
They wouldn't tolerate it.
Well, they wouldn't tolerate it, but I got to tell you, a lot of the immigrants that come to America are probably stunned by what they find when they get here with that particular mindset, because they actually came here to be American, only to find that multiculturalism asks them to remain who they are.
Good point.
And they must be thinking, wait a minute, why did I sell everything I have and leave my family if I wanted more of the same? To me, it's nonsensical, but it's political, and it goes to voter blocks That's what the real agenda is here, because the folks that want to keep people segregated can say what they politically want to this group without the rest of the groups hearing, and then they can come over to that group and tell that group what they want to hear, and this group over here what they want to hear. It's all about voter blocks, power, and money. Has nothing to do with being warm and fuzzy. It's voter blocks, power, and money. Am I off base,
Well,
Daniel?
I think those are the political people. The political people believe that. But then you have the professional conservative movement of this day and age. I always joke around, they are more politically correct than the Democrats of the previous generation. Even as late as 1993, Harry Reid agreed with everything we are saying. But that has rapidly changed, like you said, because of the political dynamic. But then you have the modern-day conservatives. They get roped into that because, by golly, I want to be a good person. I want to be good and humane, and this is how I show. Don't call me a racist, media, please. I'm not like Donald Trump. I'm not like one of these people. I'm a good person.
Look.
And, you mentioned something very important that I think before you discuss immigration, you have to discuss what America is to begin with nowadays as compared to what it was before. And an amazing thing that always stuck out with me is the last thing Ronald Reagan ever told the American people, which is the end of his farewell address he gave from the Oval Office in January 1989. He talked about an informed patriotism and understanding our history and culture. It's very powerful. It's often forgotten among many of Reagan's speeches. And what he said is, listen to this, those of us who are over 35 or so years of age grew up in a different America. And keep in mind, he's talking about 1989. I think many of us would love to go back to 1989 America.
Boy.
But he was already saying, we were taught very directly what it means to be an American. And we absorbed almost in the air a love of country and an appreciation of its institutions. If you didn't get these things from your family, you got them from the neighborhood, from the father down the street who fought in Korea, or the family who lost someone at Anzio, or you could get a sense of patriotism from school. And if all else failed, you could get a sense of patriotism from the popular culture. That was the America that he's talking about, the 20s, 30s, 40s. That's the America that the great wave of immigration from Eastern and Southern Europe was coming to and started to become citizens at that time especially. That is the America they became citizens.
Well, one of the changes, though, in the time period you referenced from 89 forward, one of the changes, especially in the last 6 years, but I'm not going to just pin it on President Obama, has been that patriotism with the media and the uber left has become not a good thing. They think, there you are, you Hitler Nazi nationalists, for being so patriotic. And I think, wait a minute, that's not what I said at all when I said I really, really support the United States. I mean, they've changed some of the words. And an example of how words have moved the needle, you talk about contemporary conservatism or modern conservatism. I was in fact, this happened twice, and the first time I missed the opportunity. The second time a person introduced, this is all within the last couple of weeks, a guy introduced himself. He says, he introduced his name and what titles he's had politically. And he said, well, you and I are on opposite ends of the spectrum. He identified himself as a classical conservative. I said, no kidding, you're here on behalf of the king. People have to understand words matter. Okay.
No, they really do, and I think if you listen to Obama carefully when he uses these words, he says there's no such thing as American exceptionalism, and it's just like Greek exceptionalism or anything. That's the root of it. They don't believe there's anything special about America. So who are we to impose our values and Americanize other people?
Daniel, let me stop you for just a second. Maybe I'm all wet. Tell me, don't hold back. But I think that it's the opposite of true. I think Obama absolutely passionately believes that America is exceptional, and he resents it and is trying to change that.
Sure. I mean, I guess that's another way of expressing. I don't disagree with that, but I'm just saying when you believe your value system is great, you want everyone to share that. And let me just get to the crux of the issue with Middle East immigration and Trump and all this stuff and what people are missing. You know, a lot of people say, well, Daniel, are you calling for this too? You've said a lot of this before. It sounds like you're saying that. I'm saying something a little different, and that's as follows. I have a friend who also works in immigration policy, and he often says, I'm against immigration, I'm pro-immigrant. Now, that sounds ridiculous, but what does that mean? What he's saying is, if you look at our founders, there's a number of quotes I could give you, and maybe if we have time we could go through Quincy Adams, a beautiful quote. They didn't like making a big deal out of immigration as an institution, and they actually write that that's why they didn't pass laws regulating it, because to regulate it was to recognize it. And they wanted just individuals to come, and then they would, you assimilate into our values. You're like anyone else. We love you. You're great. But they didn't like this institution of immigration. Why not? And let's zoom back before we talk about the Middle East. Let's talk about other parts of the world. As you mentioned, they don't share our Republican values. America is unique for a reason. A lot of them, they support gun control. They support statism. They don't support free markets. Now, does that mean we can never take an immigrant? No. But numbers, time, and origin matter in immigration policy. It's like when people say, "Oh, I'm for immigration." Well, it's like saying I'm for shoes. I'm for fat and calories. Well, how much? The devil's in the details. And that's the point. Individuals who come over, they could become Americanized. But if you reach a certain critical mass, you're not bringing over the immigrant, the individual who will become an American. You are bringing over the countries that we don't want. So now extrapolate that to the Middle East, where it's not just a matter of not sharing our kind of political values on guns and free markets. Only 1 to 3% of individuals living in most of these countries, according to 2010 Pew survey, have a favorable opinion of Jews. In other words, over 90% hate Jews. Okay, over 80% believe in Sharia law. So instead of saying, "Oh, do you agree with Trump?" these people need to answer the question, do you believe in bringing that over to our country? Now, does that mean never taking in a single Muslim at any time? No, that's not what we're talking about. But numbers and time matter. And when we make Islamic immigration our fastest growing subset of immigration, which it currently is, Saudi immigration grew as a percentage 93% since 2010. It's still not greater in numbers than, say, Mexico and China and India, but in terms of percentage, the trajectory is unreal. So rather than talking about the straw man, are we going to shut off every last thing, talk about, do we want to have a 935% increase in Saudi student visas? And that, because that is not bringing over people who could become moderate, they could assimilate into our culture. That is called bringing over the Middle East, and I don't think any sane American wants to do that.
Well, Daniel, use a term here that I find really interesting, and I'd like to hear more of it. Critical mass. There is not a problem in a community of, let's say, 100,000 people if someone who comes into that community and is a jihadist. It might be a problem in terms of damage they may do, but 1 in 100,000 is not a lot. No different than a cancer that may have been germinating within your body for 10 years. It isn't an issue until it starts to have, that starts to be noticed. And what happens is, and too often we're hearing from our liberal friends on the left and virtually the entire media, that, oh, there's nothing wrong with what's going on in California. There's nothing wrong with what's going on into these communities as all of these multicultural groups are coming together. But once there is that critical mass, then all of a sudden the switch flips. It doesn't go slowly. The switch flips like it has now in certain communities in Paris, France. We are now reaching that critical mass, or certainly seem to have more than reached it in way, way too many communities in this country.
Listen, guys, we're going to have to go to a break. We're running just a little bit over. Daniel, if you would stay with us, and we'll pick right up where Jim and your thoughts are when we come back from a break.
Absolutely.
Great, folks. We'll be right back.
And now back to the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com, into segment number 2.
Listen, welcome back, everybody. Just let me do a proper introduction this time. With me in the studio is Jim Riley, and Brian Thomas, as always, is trying to keep us on track, and what a tough job he has. There is absolutely no question about that. Appreciate you doing it. Mm-hmm. On the line with us is Daniel Horowitz, who is the senior editor of Conservative Review, previously with the Madison Project, or Red State, and Breitbart. Daniel, welcome back.
Great to be back with you. Really, really enjoyed our first hour, and I mean, wow, you guys really touched on all the key themes here.
Hey, well, I got to jump in here just quickly. I'm Googling you here, Daniel, And I'm over at Conservative
What
Review.
What a changing world we have.
Well,
I'm
think
Googling you.
I want you to know who we're speaking to. This is Conservative Review, which is a great site. Actually, I didn't realize how many of your columns I had read in the past. But your most recent column, which was posted 2 days ago, and this is in response to the Attorney General of the United States of America making a comment that she'd be unhappy and would use the full power of the United States government to go after people who displeased her. And your headline, which I just love you, man, is "Come Get Me, Loretta." And just fantastic. And that's the kind of guy we're talking to on the phone right today. Come get me, Loretta.
I mean, that's the thing. We need to realize that we're fighting for our survival. And, you know, there's a word in the English language that I really like when discussing politics, and that's diffidence. The word diffidence. There is not a lot of confidence in conservatives. Don't have a lot of confidence in their views. I find this with a lot of professional conservatives. They're diffident about their own views.
So true.
They don't believe in the veracity of their views. They don't believe in the morality of it. So when the media starts barking, they start running, you know, and you're not supposed to run away from a barking dog. You stand your ground.
Listen, I got to tell you on that point, Daniel, one of the few compliments the Uber left, including President Obama gets from at least Jim Riley and I on this show, is that we may passionately disagree with him, but they don't shrink. They're not shrinking violets. They are passionate about what they believe in. And, man, they'll look you in the eyeball and say it twice and say it louder if you didn't hear them or rejected it the first time. And we need to be that way. I think that goes to your point.
No, and that's the imbalance we have in American politics. We have one side that is willing. I mean, these guys are like SEAL Team 6 of politics. The Democrats, I mean, they will cut your heart out and then come back for the carcass. I mean, these guys don't miss a beat.
They
and then
do
you have
that.
The Republican Party committed to doing their agenda.
Yeah, Daniel, I agree with that. One of the differences, though, and let me be shrill for a moment, if we've watched over the last 30 years, especially with the advent of cable television, where we had some, I can't remember his name anymore, doesn't matter, some U.S. representative that was allegedly seeking male affairs, and so he was tapping his foot in a public bathroom stall. And the guy ran out of office over tapping his foot in a public restroom stall. That was the entire evidence that they had against this guy. Whereas no matter what the other side does, nobody seems to care. Politics doesn't. Politics and their personal life is separate on the other side. Where I'm going with this is I think that a lot of the conservative leadership in America, at least two-thirds of them, a third I just flatly disagree with. The other two-thirds, a lot of them have become, frankly, afraid of what the media is able to do to them. And people, a lot of grassroots people, may think they seem to get lost, like, I hate to be contrite, but lost like goldfish, going back and forth in the tank, whatever direction the media is sending them.
Or focus on the Export-Import Bank, or focus on, notice how I always say, they don't want to focus on anything that has a whiff of culture. My 3 S's: sovereignty, security, and society. Fiscal issues certainly matter, but those are foundational, and that used to be what it means to be a conservative, a Phyllis Schlafly conservative. They don't want to talk about that because I joke around with some of my friends that were conservatives of this era cannot even hold ground that Democrats were able to hold just a generation ago. And, look, they allow this administration to get away with unbelievable things rather than focus on Donald Trump. Even if you strongly disagree with him, again, is he the problem? Is the problem not the administration having ties to the Muslim Brotherhood at the highest level? And you want to talk about calling people Hitler? I mean, these people call for the extermination of Jews, and that's what I meant. Come get me, Loretta. Really, you're going to create this contrived problem that the problem in the country is anti-Muslim sentiment? Are you kidding me? You're bringing in people who absolutely hate Jews, like you saw from Farouk's family. How many more of them are there? And it gets back to our discussion before the break that immigration, it's a cumulative effect. too many, even on our side, are talking about vetting. Well, is this a radical one? Is this a terrorist? Or will this guy not be a terrorist? But they miss the point. Most of the people, 99%, don't have a paper trail of prior terror activity before they strike for the first time. But it's a cumulative thing, like you see in the Minneapolis Somali community. You see some places in Michigan now.
Daniel, I get it, but here's the point I'm trying to make with fear, and I want you to weave this in because, and we'll just give you a really short example. In public schools, we no longer can say Merry Christmas or have Christmas vacation, but they're providing for prayer rugs and prayer private rooms for Muslims. And I'm going, wait a minute, where in the heck is the balance in this? And that's not a statement against. I'm sorry.
Well, that's where I disagree. It is balanced.
How is that balanced? How is it balanced?
You talk about the fear.
Yep.
I think fear is the symptom. But what's the problem? Fear. The problem is, again, we do have a national religion. I once wrote a column. At what point does the homosexual agenda become a violation of the Establishment Clause of the Constitution? They always accuse, Christians of establishing a national religion just for simply displaying the Ten Commandments or something. But they literally are throwing someone in jail for Kim Davis for just peacefully abstaining from not signing something that was against her conscience. And you have the same thing here. On the surface, it's a paradox. You look at liberals and they can't stand religious Christians and Jews, but somehow they embrace the most repressive, Sharia that just the way they treat women and gays and it just flies in the face on the surface against everything they believe. But it's really very consistent because they have a religion of, again, multiculturalism, PC, whatever you want to call it. And if you are viewed as, in their mind, a person of color, in their mind, a protected class, so you are to be worshipped and everyone else is the problem. So ironically, even though many tenets of Islam, particularly Sharia, are really problematic for them, to them, they don't view that as a threat because they're a protected class. They are a persecuted class in their mind. How could they be a threat? The real threat is the Confederate flag, which died 150 years ago.
Yeah. Again, and these folks are very easily set back on their heels by someone with similar, as you said, SEAL Team 6 fervor. The problem is that so many, because of political correctness and the power of political correctness, so many of our elected politicians just run for the tall grass as soon as anyone accuses them of being nasty people. Donald Trump might very well be that nasty person, but he doesn't. He stands tall, and that's what so many people admire.
No, absolutely. And look, this ties into what we wanted to talk about before with states and refugees and colonization of states. I think it's not just on a federal level where you've seen bankrupt Republican leadership. You could certainly speak to it in Michigan and elsewhere, really all the states, where for years they've been completely complacent. They have not taken on the federal government for colonizing their localities, their counties, societal transformation without representation. The people never voted for this. Again, strong numbers matter. This carte blanche transforming of their local communities, and they're too scared. So a lot of county and state officials kind of go along with it.
They're afraid. They're afraid. But listen, a lot of those changes that are creeping one little step at a time that we're not even noticing are tied to all of the federal monies that are coming in. In fact, we've done entire shows on that where, in fact, the federal government, if they want to control a foreign state, they do it with money. And if they want to control a state, a county, or a township, they do it with money. We call it grants. If you ever look at all of the strings that are attached to this 50-50 match money or federal grant money, it's laughable.
Oh, yeah.
It's laughable, if not so sad. And of course, so the local township, local county, and on our state level, they go, yeah, we got to plug our nose for the policy, but we sure do like all that money, and so we're slowly selling our sovereignty.
No, exactly. We are selling our sovereignty, and a lot of people don't understand what state sovereignty means. Some people automatically recoil, oh, you're talking about nullification, or, you think states are sovereign. It's not sovereign in that sense, but a state does have the right to its territorial sovereignty.
The states in the United States have been reduced to 50 regional tax collection centers. There's no such thing as a state's right or sovereign state. None of that stuff exists anymore. And the uber left, if I put that on Facebook, for example, the uber left will pound me saying, yeah, Mike, you're right. That was prosecuted in the Civil War. There is no such thing as state rights. And listen, folks, if we don't have 50 sovereign states, then we don't have a union of states. If we don't have that, then there's no such thing as the United States of America. And that's a fearsome paragraph to rattle off.
Yeah, Scalia always says, he said this a few times in his speeches and some of his dissents recently, especially with regards to immigration, especially with regards to Arizona. He said, could you imagine the state of Arizona ever agreeing to join the Union had they known that you would have a foreign invasion affecting every aspect of life in their state, their culture, their criminal justice system, education, the schools, the hospitals, welfare, and there's not a darn thing they could do, and the federal government could screw them, and their hands are tied. It
wow.
makes
what a comment.
Absolutely true, though. He's spot on.
It is. They would have never joined the Union. And that's what I point out in my piece on states fighting back on refugees, that people have a huge misunderstanding as to why the Constitution federalized immigration policy took away from the states where it was during the Articles of Confederation. It was not to prevent states from protecting their sovereignty and clamping down. It was, harkening back to our earlier discussion, it was to prevent the very societal transformation we're seeing right now. They didn't want to prevent states from Arizona, to just give a modern analogy, from doing what they're doing. Their idea was to prevent California from doing what they're doing, because the notion was, Justice Joseph Story, who has he was one of the early Supreme Court justices, and he had one of the most authoritative commentaries, treatises on the Constitution. And he was very clear as to why they federalized it, because he said if aliens might be admitted indiscriminately to enjoy all the rights of citizens at the will of a single state, the Union might itself be endangered by an influx of foreigners hostile to its institutions, ignorant of its powers, and incapable of a due estimate of its privileges. It was exactly that. They didn't want one state trying to gain extra power in the legislature, like you find with California gaining an extra 4 seats because of illegal immigration. They didn't want that, so they figured the federal government would protect the entire union. No one ever envisioned such malfeasance that at a federal level they would screw the entire country and impel fundamental transformation without representation.
Yeah, arbitrate interstate commerce and defend the states in total, period. And of course, we're so lost from those concepts, and it's always funding. Listen, Daniel Horowitz, we're out of time, but I've really enjoyed having you on, and want to have you on again somewhere in the next 2 or 3 weeks if you're available.
Really looking forward to it.
There's a whole bunch of stuff we've got to dive right into, and so we'll arrange that off air. But Daniel Horowitz, thank you very, very much. How can people find you? Give us a web address or something so folks can follow you.
ConservativeReview.com. All of the information is free. We got information on Congress, all the legislative issues, legal issues, everything important going on in the country. My section as senior editor is the conservative conscience at Conservative Review.
Remember, my friend, no surrender, no retreat.
Absolutely no backing down. This is Western civilization we need to defend.
Thank you very, very much, Daniel. We'll be back with you soon. Folks, we'll be right back.
And now we return to the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com. What is lurking around the corner? It's the Enigma Report.
I have a tough time picking up from that because I'm sitting here laughing.
Well, it's lurking, man.
It is lurking.
Watch out.
Listen, I want to share something with you today. By the way, I'm 54. I'm getting ready in January to be 55. I tell you that because it's kind of important to the story. I often say that the America I grew up in doesn't exist. So have that in the back of your head when I read you this quote. Today, we need a nation of Minutemen, citizens who are not only prepared to take arms, but citizens who regard the preservation of freedom as the basic purpose of their daily life and who are willing to consciously work and sacrifice for that freedom. Jim Riley, anybody, do you know who said that?
That had to be somebody back in the olden times, Ben Franklin or George
How about a radical
Washington.
Tea Partier? Could be one of those evil right-wing extremists.
It could
the
be.
gun lovers with Bibles in their hands.
And thumping the Bible and in love with a gun.
Oh, yeah. It could be.
But I don't know. It would have to be, I would think, somebody back in, one of the founders, one of the guys who wrote the Federalist Papers.
It was actually words spoken on January 29th of 1961. So I'd have
1961?
1961 seems like only yesterday. I was born on the 18th of January.
Oh.
This was, 11 days later. And listen, that was John F. Kennedy.
Could you one more time? That's stunning to me.
Can I read it?
Yeah, because
just for funsies.
Well, now that we know that this was said by one of the most revered politicians, and certainly most revered Democrat politicians, but in history, read that one more time.
Today we need a nation of Minutemen, citizens who are not only prepared to take arms, but citizens who regard the preservation of freedom as the basic purpose of their daily life and who are willing to consciously work and sacrifice for that freedom. John F. Kennedy, January 29th of 1961.
Unbelievable.
And it sounds like a right-wing extremist Tea Partier. And obviously, my point is that's how America changed. Now, listen, last night in preparing for today's show, I Googled that. I took a couple sentences out of it, and I Googled it. And it was laughable what I found, so please do it, folks. It was a whole bunch, return after return on Google of people trying to confirm if JFK really said that, because their uber leftist heads were flipping off their shoulders to think that the man was a patriot. How alarming is that?
Well, the definition of patriot most certainly has changed over the last few decades. That's for sure. That was a patriot back in the day.
He really was, and now he'd be a right-wing Republican.
Well, he'd be a nut. He'd be somebody who was probably a hater. Again, it's a sad commentary that particular beautiful phrase, spoken by one of the great American presidents, that today would mark you as a hater, a bigot, a racist, and
but
the rest of the yes.
Listen, all of you uber leftists, aside from trying to confirm that it was true, they all lamented on the fact that, and I have to use the term because they like it so much, gun nuts were wrapping their arms around this phrase and twisting it to mean something different than it meant. Now, listen, I've read it twice, folks. You can Google it yourself. It isn't hard to understand what the man said. I don't picture John F. Kennedy as a gun nut. I picture John F. Kennedy as a man that loved the United States of America and defended freedom, regardless of who people were. Didn't care about race. He loved freedom. He was bordering on being a classical liberal. That's what the civil rights that the Republicans advanced in the first place was all about. But listen, the point of it isn't all of that. I am a gun nut by their definition. I've been watching in the news. In fact, I think you touched on it on the morning show today. I've been watching in the news how we've got to stop guns again. Every time there's an incident happens, doesn't matter who or why, because we can't talk about why somebody would shoot somebody up. We can't talk about Bath, Michigan, where they used dynamite for the most outrageous, killed more people than any other incident in a public school. Was that 1928 or something like that?
It was way back.
And the guy used dynamite. What we have to do is say there were terrorists in San Bernardino and in Paris, and they used firearms, therefore we got to get rid of firearms. There's a bill floating around with all of these shrill, uber, crazy leftists advancing it because they don't understand what they're advancing. In this case, it's the AR, the Evil Assault Rifle. By the way, AR stands for Armor Light Rifle, Armor Light being the company that invented it in the 50s. And facts do matter. These things really do matter. It isn't an assault rifle. If it were an assault rifle, we'd use a heavy caliber firearm rather than what's really a varmint round. It's a varmint round. Your grandfather may have used that round to go hunt squirrels with. It's laughable to anybody that actually understands these things, what they're saying. Like the one nut that said the only good thing about a magazine is when it's empty, you got to throw it away and go buy another one. I go, and they elected her?
No, you mean a magazine for a gun.
A magazine for a gun.
Yeah. And that was a United States Congresswoman.
Listen, it just scared the heck out of me. Not that she is that stupid, but there are people even dumber than her that think that they should vote for her. Those things I find just fearsome. When someone will make not one, but just comment after comment in the public arena, that's just not founded in common sense. So take the San Bernardino people. Rather than asking the question of why would these people do this to innocent people, we say, oh, just take away the guns, that'll solve the problem. Well, folks, it doesn't solve the problem. Paris, France in general, but Paris more so, has got probably in the top 5 of the strictest anti-gun laws in the world. Global. I know liberals like that word. They're about the top 5 strictest global anti-gun laws. And it didn't stop the people that don't care about the laws.
Well, not only that,
they're hunting all over. Does anybody have a gun so we can defend ourselves?
There's a photo back in the Charlie Hebdo massacre, which of course happened in France before this most recent one back in January. There's a photo of the masked gunner, the Islamic terrorist, walking up to a police officer in Paris on the ground, unarmed, because the police officers are also unarmed, just walking up and putting a few bullets in to finish off the job.
Guy's laying on the ground, and he's in uniform, and he's begging for his life with one of these armed thug nuts killing him. And we're watching the picture, and I'm thinking to myself, what kind of mentality thinks it's a good idea to let that police officer have no means to defend himself?
Well, it's not a logical issue. There are people that, for whatever reason, but certainly not a logical reason, just don't like guns in the hands of honest people who've gotten their guns legally. They don't like it.
They don't want guns in anybody's hands, and the assumption is that they can get rid of an 1,100-year-old technology. Do you know that the average person can make gunpowder in their backyard?
Oh, sure. They can make serious bombs in their basement.
And the point is that if we don't get our hands around why people are doing these things, then they're going to keep doing them. I listen to the talking heads on the television go, well, we've got the highest gun violence rate in the world. But when they see it, they have to word themselves very carefully, because if they were just to say death by violence, then that statement wouldn't be true anymore. So if you're in Russia and you can't get a gun, but you take a ball-peen hammer and beat someone to death, that person is just as dead. And we have to get our hands around why people do these things and start arresting that, rather than taking away my family's right to defend myself, my nation and my state. Well, and you, by the way.
Well, I would agree, except for one thing. The why isn't important to the person or certainly the family members of those who are dead. One of the things that we do know,
I think a lot of people that lost a loved one are standing there praying to God, by the way, saying, please tell me why. Why would you take my brother, my sister, my mother away from me?
I think that the people who did it made it very clear. They hate them, all right? I mean, it's not like it happened by mistake. They've been very clear.
How do you hate somebody you've never met in your life?
Well, look, you asked for a why. They're very clear into the why. You can keep going beyond that and bring in, maybe we need an army of psychiatrists. But the reality is that these people are coming into this country. They are being paid. They are being encouraged to come into this country. Once they get here, the cost is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per refugee that comes into this country. We are allowing them 68,000 undocumented children have come across our southern border just within the last year.
Taxpayer funded.
They're coming in taxpayer funded. Oh, my golly, you wouldn't believe. The problem is you can work and let others talk about the why. We do know this. If they're not here, they're not going to be murdering our family members. And Donald Trump said, look, until we get a government that will guarantee that we will secure our borders, and those that we bring in aren't those who absolutely whose only goal in coming here is killing us, until we can get a guarantee from our government, let's hold off. Let's maybe take a look at the rules. Let's see how we're enforcing them. That, to me, makes a lot of sense.
I absolutely agree with that, but there are two tracks that we have to go on. The first is Obama's, and in fact, in our first segment, this was talked about by Daniel Horowitz a little bit. But who are we bringing in, and what numbers of those folks are we bringing in?
Critical mass.
Is alarming. It is critical mass. But the other side of it is we've got some folks with some mental health issues in the United States. And so the very people that say get rid of guns because the people with mental problems are killing each other are the ones that support laws like the HIPAA law that prevent a lot of psychiatrists who are afraid for liability from picking up the phone and saying, hey, this guy's someone that we need to follow and be concerned with. Those T's and I's are not getting dotted while we worried about what the definition of an armor light rifle is.
Yeah, well, that's
AR,
another
armor
issue.
light rifle, not assault rifle. Assault rifle is when you're trying to make your varmint gun evil. If I spray painted them all pink, nobody would be mad about them. I don't get it. It's silliness.
Well, we know.
Mass shootings during the Ronald Reagan's, and this is defined as 4 or more. During Ronald Reagan's era, there were 11. During George Bush's senior era, there was 12. During Bill Clinton's era, there was 23. During George W. Bush's era, there were 16. During Barack Obama's era, there were 162.
Well,
Did you get that, folks? It's just math.
And of course,
Something is going on in our society, and I disagree with you a little bit, Jim. Aside from the terrorists, we understand we need to turn that valve off and stop them from coming to the United States until we can get our hands around it. Aside from that issue, we need to look at ourselves, have a long look in the mirror, and say, why in the world is this happening? What's going on with our culture? That we can't have a Christmas party, but we demand that we have prayer rooms in public school, and we've got nuts running around killing people. We have to focus on the methodology and not the sickness that drives it. That's upside down thinking to me.
Well, as I forget who said this, but if you subsidize something, you get more of it. If you tax something, you get less of it. We are subsidizing that kind of behavior, be it homegrown or foreign imported. We are subsidizing that kind of behavior that I don't think anyone in this country really wants to see more of.
I'm reading a message I'm getting sent in. The Vatican turned into a movie screen. Sad. It's a house of prayer, not a house of thieves. Are you familiar with what this person is messaging me?
Yes, but it has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
It was a curiosity. I don't have a clue what they're talking about.
There's a movie coming out.
About the Vatican?
Yeah.
Is it really negative on the Vatican?
No, from what I understand, it's very honest.
Okay.
It's about the child abuse.
Was that an invited by the Vatican movie, or is it one of those unauthorized biography kind of things?
I believe it's probably a pretty accurate movie.
Okay,
but again, it has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
Well, don't tear up, Jim. I'm just asking. He gets so emotional. He does.
It may have been just one of these promotional calls, and they know you're doing a show, so
I think that's probably
they try to
true.
catch you before the end of the show to get some free press.
Hey, it worked.
Yeah.
Because I agree with this person. It's a prayer house, it's not Hollywood. All of that said, listen, you folks, please find us at Twitter at Talking Mike Hewitt, on Facebook at / The Mike Hewitt Show. The Mike Hewitt Show also has a website, themikehewittShow.com. And of course, you can find this on YouTube. This show today, if you missed any part of it, and not that you want to hear me necessarily or Jim, but Daniel Horowitz is truly an intelligent fella. The show replays this evening at 11 o'clock on iHeart.com. Folks, we'll see you next Wednesday at 9 a.m. And I got to tell you, we got another really big show. See you then. Thanks. Bye-bye now.